Have you ever caught yourself rereading a message you just sent, looking for something that might have come out wrong? Not an important message, maybe just a sounds good to a coworker, an "I got it" to your boss. Something simple, the kind of reply most people type in 2 seconds and forget in 3, but you didn't forget. You stayed there, phone in your hand, reading those 2 words over and over like they were a legal document. Did that sound rude? Did it come off cold? Will they think I'm upset? The message is already gone. You can't change it now. But your mind doesn't accept that. It keeps running simulations, measuring possible damage, trying to predict how the other person will react. And while all of that is happening inside your head, the other person probably already saw it, thought, okay, and moved on with their day. They're not thinking about you. But you just spent the last 20 minutes completely inside their mind, trying to control a perception you were never going to be able to control. That's the fear of judgment. Not the dramatic kind, not the stage fright, not forgetting your lines in front of a crowd. It's quieter than that. It's this constant silent monitoring running in the background like a program you don't know how to shut off. It's there when you ask a question in a meeting and start scanning every face while you speak. It's there when you walk into a crowded room and immediately start calculating where to stand, how to look, what to do with your hands. It's there when you rehearse a phone call beforehand and then replay the conversation for hours after it's already over. It might even be here right now, a small part of you wondering quietly, is this really me? Or am I just overthinking? You're not overthinking. The weight is real. The exhaustion is real. And here's something no one may have ever said to you this clearly. This fear was built, brick by brick, experience by experience, starting very early in your life for reasons that once made perfect sense. And because it was built, it can also be taken apart. Not with quick tips, not with a checklist you force yourself to follow for a week, but with a real understanding of where this came from and a concrete 30-day process that can change the way you exist around other people. Stay with me. Before we go any deeper into the story, I want to tell you, I need to ask you for one thing, just one. Slow down. Not in the technical sense of pausing the video, I mean internally. Let go of that tension that might be sitting with you right now, the voice that says, I already know what social anxiety is, I've read about it, I've tried things, nothing really worked for me. Or the voice that says, I should have fixed this a long time ago. What kind of adult is still this afraid of being judged, or the quietest one of all? Maybe this is just who I am, maybe it's my personality, maybe there's no fixing it. Those voices are the fear itself, trying to protect its place. It's fear trying to convince you that it's not worth trying again. So you never try and never discover that there is a way out. You're an adult with a complex history. You didn't get here by accident. And the difficulty you feel around other people is not a character flaw. It's not pathological shyness. It's not something broken in you. It's patterns, learned patterns, deeply rooted ones, patterns that make sense once you understand the story behind them. And patterns can be rewritten. I'm not asking you to believe that right now. I'm only asking you to leave that possibility open as we move forward together. What you're about to hear is the story of a person, someone you might recognize, not because their life is identical to yours, but because what they feel inside, what they think before, during, and after every social situation, what they do when fear shows up, will probably feel familiar in a way that might tighten your chest a little, and it's okay if it tightens. That tightening is the beginning of understanding. His name is Lucas. He's 31, a systems analyst at a mid-sized company. He lives alone in a one-bedroom apartment, has since he was 26. He has 2 real friends, the kind he sees maybe once a month, sometimes less. There's a work WhatsApp group where he reads everything and almost never replies. He has an Instagram profile too. The last photos are 2 years old. Not because he stopped living, because posting means exposure, and exposure means being evaluated. Lucas isn't a sad person, at least not in the way people usually imagine. He laughs. He has a good sense of humor. He likes movies. He likes cooking. He actually got really good at making artisan bread. He has opinions, interesting ones. When he shares them with his two friends at a bar, people lean forward and say, "Man, I never thought about it that way." The problem isn't that he has nothing to offer, it's that around other people, he becomes a smaller version of himself, monitored, calculated, carefully edited before being shown. Thursday morning, the alarm rings at 7:15. Lucas opens his eyes, and before he even moves, the first thought is already there. The team meeting is at 10 today. A slight tightening in his stomach, small but unmistakable. His body has already started preparing for something that's still 3 hours away. In the shower, his mind slips into rehearsal mode without being invited. Renata will make that face if there's any inconsistency in the report, but it's not inconsistent. What's missing is the client data that came in late. She doesn't know that. Should I explain before presenting, or will that sound like I'm making excuses? If I explain, it looks weak. If I don't, it looks careless. It's 7:22. Lucas is still in the shower, and he's already exhausted by a conversation that hasn't even happened. He drinks coffee standing in the kitchen, opens the work chat. A message from his manager sent at 10:43 the night before. "Lucas, can you bring October's numbers 2 for today's meeting?" He reads it 3 times. What does 2 mean? Were the numbers he prepared not enough? Is something wrong that everyone else knows except him? He types a reply, deletes it, types again. "Sure, no problem." Deletes, "No problem." Too informal. "Sure." Sends it. Immediately thinks, too dry. That sounded irritated. The blue check marks appear. Too late. He takes the stairs. The elevator sometimes has the neighbor from the 4th floor, and he doesn't have the energy for small talk. On the subway, he puts on headphones. For 38 minutes, the music is a real shield. As long as he has headphones, he doesn't have to be available. He doesn't have to manage impressions. He just exists, invisible in the crowd. And that invisibility is a relief he wouldn't know how to name if someone asked. At the office, he greets the receptionist with a nod. No words, because if he speaks, she'll respond, and it becomes an interaction he didn't script for the morning. In the elevator with 2 people from marketing, all 3 stare at the floor numbers during the 30-second ride. Lucas steps out on the 5th floor and feels a small, involuntary relief that lasts 2 seconds before being replaced by shame. What kind of 31-year-old feels relieved just because he left an elevator? At his desk, he does what he does very well. He works. He organizes, reviews, prepares slides with the level of detail his co-workers praise, and it is real quality. But there's an extra layer underneath it. In technical work, the rules are clear. A number is right or wrong. There's no gray zone where someone can form a negative opinion based on something he can't control. 9:52. Lucas goes to the bathroom, drinks water, looks at himself in the mirror, breathes. It's just a meeting. You know what's in the report. The words make rational sense. But his heart is beating faster than the situation requires. His hands are slightly cold, and there's that familiar tightness in the center of his chest. Not pain, more like a steady pressure that never fully lets go. He enters the meeting room. 6 people are already there. He chooses a chair not in the center and not too far in the corner. The smile he offers to whoever makes eye contact is controlled, safe, built over years without him ever realizing it. When it's his turn, he presents with a steady voice, professional tone. He explains the delayed client data exactly the way he planned in the shower. Then Renata asks, looking directly at him, why was October's variation higher if transaction volume dropped? He knows the answer, completely. But for 2 seconds, 2 exact seconds, he freezes. Not because he doesn't know, because he suddenly feels the weight of 6 pairs of eyes at once. And in those 2 seconds, his mind isn't processing the technical answer. It's processing the social situation. They saw me freeze. What does Renata's expression mean? 2 seconds. He answers, explains clearly. The meeting moves on. At the end, his manager says, "Good work, Lucas." Lucas spends the next 4 hours trying to determine whether that good work was genuine or just polite. On the subway home, his headphones are out of battery, 42 minutes standing between strangers, doing what he does every night, the replay. He revisits every moment of the meeting, frame by frame. Those 2 seconds of silence come back again and again, 6 times, 7, 8. Renata's expression, his manager's tone. At home, he eats dinner with a series playing mostly as background noise. At 10:47 p.m., a message appears in the work group. Holiday dinner confirmed for the 15th Italian restaurant, 7 p.m. Confirm attendance. Lucas reads it, locks the phone, unlocks it again. The 15th is free. But the automatic risk assessment has already started. People from other departments he doesn't know. A loud environment. That moment of arriving and not knowing where to sit. 2 hours managing impressions with 12 people at once, while trying to look like he's enjoying himself. He clears the notification, decides to think about it later. He lies down at 11:15. White ceiling. The last thought before sleep, which only comes at 12:40, is those same 2 seconds of silence. Renata's expression and the unanswered question, what did she think of me in that moment? This is Lucas's life, not a life of visible catastrophes, a life of invisible wars, fought inside a mind that never stops against an enemy that wears the face of everyone around him. And the cruelest part is this, no one knows. From the outside, he looks calm, competent, reserved. The storm is internal, silent, and completely exhausting. I need you to pause here for a second. How many of those scenes felt familiar to you? They don't have to match exactly. Maybe your Lucas is a woman. Maybe they work in a different field. Maybe the fear shows up more in family settings than at work, more in romantic relationships than in meetings. But the mechanism, that constant monitoring of what other people might be thinking, the rehearsing before, the replay afterward, the exhaustion of simply existing around others, did you recognize that? If you did, there's something important you need to understand about how serious this actually is, not to scare you, but to help you stop normalizing it. Because one of the most dangerous things about the fear of judgment is how easily it blends into everyday life. It stops looking like a problem. It becomes just how I am. My personality. I've always been kind of reserved. And little by little, you stop questioning it. You stop looking for answers. You learn to build an entire life around avoiding anything that might trigger it. Think about the real cost of that. Think about the last time you wanted to ask a question in a group setting and stayed quiet. Not because the question was bad, but because you calculated the risk of sounding obvious or exposing a gap, and the risk felt too high. You walked away knowing less than you could have known. Think about a relationship that never went deeper, because you never showed yourself fully. Not because the other person wasn't safe, but because showing who you are means giving someone the power to judge you. So you stayed on the surface, and what could have been a real connection turned into polite coexistence. Think about opportunities that passed you by because they required visibility. A presentation, leading a project, starting a conversation with someone who could have opened a door. The risk of exposure felt bigger than the benefit. Someone else stepped forward, and you stayed where you were. Think about the nights replaying every word you said in a social situation, every silence, every moment you felt you got it wrong. Hours of mental energy spent processing interactions that were already over, trying to fix, in hindsight, something that can't be fixed anymore. This isn't introversion. Introversion is a preference for lower stimulation environments, for fewer, deeper connections. This is suffering, this is restriction. This is a life that gradually becomes smaller as fear decides what feels safe to do, to say, to be. And there's a physical cost too, one that rarely gets talked about. Lucas's racing heart before the meeting, the cold hands, the tightness in his chest. Those weren't isolated moments. That was his nervous system activating a stress response, flooding his body with cortisol and adrenaline to face a threat that objectively wasn't there. When that state gets activated over and over for years, it leaves marks. Chronic muscle tension, sleep problems, persistent fatigue, and that quiet, constant background feeling that something bad is about to happen, even when everything is fine. And then there's the deepest cost of all, the cost to your identity. When you spend years monitoring yourself, editing yourself, there comes a point where you genuinely don't know anymore who you would be without doing that. The version of you around others becomes so different from the version of you when you're alone that it feels like two separate people. And that creates a very specific kind of loneliness. The loneliness of never being fully seen because you've never fully shown yourself. This isn't destiny. It's the consequence of something that happened, something that was learned. And now, I'm going to show you exactly what it was. There's a concept from depth psychology I need to introduce to you now, because once you understand it, it changes how you see everything we've talked about so far. A Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung spent his life mapping the deepest layers of the human mind, and he developed a concept called the shadow. The shadow isn't the bad side of a person, like people often assume. The shadow is the place where everything rejected gets stored. Everything you learned at some point in life was not safe to show, not safe to feel, not safe to be. As we grow up, we constantly receive signals about what is acceptable and what is not. Those signals come from parents, teachers, classmates, family, culture. And whenever a part of who we are triggers a negative reaction, punishment, rejection, humiliation, a look of disapproval, we quickly learn to hide that part. It goes into the shadow. It becomes invisible, but not inactive. What goes into the shadow doesn't disappear. It keeps influencing us from a place we can't see directly. In the case of fear of judgment, what got pushed into the shadow very early was something very specific. The belief that you, as you are not enough, that you need to be edited, filtered, adjusted before being shown, that the spontaneous, uncalculated version of you is at risk of being rejected. And that belief usually has an origin scene. The shadow has a story, and when something has a story, it starts losing its power. So I want you to step into a story within the story. Lucas is 9 years old. He's sitting in a science class. The teacher asks why the moon doesn't fall to Earth. Lucas knows the answer. He read about it in a book he got for his birthday. He raises his hand. The teacher calls on him. He explains with the genuine enthusiasm of a child who just discovered something fascinating. His voice is a little louder than the usual classroom tone. He makes one small technical mistake. The teacher corrects him politely. But before she finishes, a boy in the third row laughs. Not a big laugh, just that short, nasal, slightly superior kind of laugh that points at you. 2 other boys laugh too, almost automatically. 3 seconds. The teacher continues the lesson. For everyone else, the moment is already over. For Lucas, it isn't. During recess, he sits on the stairs with his lunch, replaying those 3 seconds again and again. And slowly, a conclusion forms. With the logic of a 9-year-old mind that doesn't yet have the tools to question its own conclusions, when I show what I know, when I speak with enthusiasm, I can make a mistake in front of everyone and become a reason for laughter. This wasn't a capital T trauma. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that happens hundreds of times in any childhood. But depending on a child's temperament and how often similar moments repeat, a conclusion like that can settle very deep. During adolescence, Lucas develops what looks like a personality trait. He's observant. He talks less, but when he talks, it's precise. It's not a conscious strategy. It's adaptation. The protection system built at 9 became more sophisticated and learned to disguise itself as a strength. In adulthood, that system is so integrated, Lucas doesn't even know it exists. He doesn't think, I'm protecting myself from being ridiculed like when I was 9. He thinks, I'm introverted. I'm a perfectionist. I prefer to listen. Adult translations of a child's survival strategy, and the core mechanism is exactly what we saw in his routine: constant monitoring, keeping tight control over the impression he creates. So he's never caught off guard, never corrected in public, never gives that imagined laughing boy, who now wears the face of anyone in the room, a reason to laugh again. The problem is this: that system was calibrated by a 9-year-old for a very specific situation, and it was never updated. It's still running the same code decades later, in an adult life where the real consequences of making mistakes or showing imperfection are completely different from what a child once imagined. Adult Lucas has resources 9-year-old Lucas didn't have: perspective, resilience, the ability to process criticism in a much more complex way. But the protection system doesn't know that. It's still trying to protect the 9-year-old boy in a war that ended long ago. And here is the central point. You can't deactivate a protection system by fighting it. You can't force yourself to stop fearing judgment through willpower alone, just like you couldn't stop a fire alarm from ringing by yelling at it. The alarm isn't wrong. It's doing exactly what it was programmed to do. What needs to change is the programming. In Jungian psychology, there's an archetype that shows up again and again in the lives of people who carry a deep fear of judgment. Jung called archetypes universal patterns of behavior, structures that appear repeatedly across cultures and individual stories because they belong to the deepest architecture of human experience. The archetype I want to introduce to you is something we could call the adult who waits for approval. This person isn't a child. Physically, chronologically, they're an adult. They have responsibilities, they pay bills, they make complex decisions. But in certain situations, especially those that involve being seen and possibly judged, something shifts inside. They move into a position of waiting for a signal, waiting for someone outside to confirm that they were good enough, appropriate enough, acceptable enough. And until that signal arrives, they can't fully relax. They can't fully be present. They stay monitoring, calculating, trying to anticipate what behavior will finally produce the approval they're waiting for. Let me show you what this looks like in real life. First scene. Carolina is 28. She's a designer. She spent 3 weeks working on a project. She knows every detail, every creative decision. She presents it to the client. The client listens carefully, asks thoughtful questions, and at the end says, "This is great, Carolina. I love the direction. Simple, clear, positive." On the way back to the agency, a co-worker asks, "Are you happy with how it went?" Carolina answers, "I think it went well. I think." 3 weeks of work, direct positive feedback, and the response is, "I think." Because Carolina can't receive approval as something real. The internal system that processes approval is broken at the starting point. There's always a reservation, always a but, always a reason to keep waiting. Second scene. Raphael is 34. He's a university professor. He's known as one of the best in his department. Every semester, student evaluations come in, 92% positive, specific praise about his clarity, his enthusiasm, 8% criticism, some constructive, some vague. Raphael spends the entire day reading the 8%. The 92 slide right past him. They don't stick. They don't change how he feels. But every vague criticism, every could improve teaching style without saying how, stays and grows. It becomes a question with no answer. What am I doing wrong that I can't see? That's the archetype in action. Approval doesn't nourish because the system was built to search for rejection, not out of self-punishment, out of hypervigilance. The radar is calibrated to detect threat, so threat is what it detects most efficiently. And here's the most important part. This archetype doesn't disappear with more achievements, more praise, more approval. It disappears when a person stops searching outside for something that can only be built on the inside. Look at this. Look carefully. because this is where the trap is. When we realize we're afraid of being judged, the instinctive reaction is to try to push ourselves into more exposure, to force the situation. I'll accept every social invitation for a month. I'll make myself speak in every meeting. I'll stop caring what people think of me. And as if the cure was simply doing the opposite of the symptom. This approach usually fails, not because exposure is wrong, it is a necessary part of the process, but because exposure without inner work is just more stress. It's throwing your body into situations that your system still interprets as a threat, without giving it any real reason to update its sense of risk. The result is predictable: 2 or 3 uncomfortable attempts, maybe a few moments that seem to confirm your worst fears, and then a deeper retreat, now reinforced by the conclusion, I tried, it didn't work. But there's an even subtler trap. This one catches the most intelligent people, the most self-aware ones, the ones who have already read about social anxiety and understand rationally where their fear came from. It's the trap of understanding without integration. You can fully understand that your fear of judgment came from early experiences of rejection. You can know it's an outdated protection system. You can clearly explain that the threats you perceive aren't objectively real. You can explain all of this to someone else with clarity, and still, in the next meeting, your heart will race exactly the same way, because intellectual understanding and pattern change are 2 different processes. They happen in different parts of the brain. Understanding happens in the rational, analytical mind. Fear happens in a much older, faster system, one that detects threat before conscious thought even forms. You don't think first and then feel. You feel first, and then your mind tries to explain what just happened. The trap is believing that understanding is enough, that finding the root automatically solves the problem. Understanding is the beginning. It opens the door. But real change has to happen at the level of experience, through repeated practice, through the body learning over time that what once felt dangerous is no longer dangerous now. And that is exactly what the next 30 days are designed to do. Before we begin, there's something essential you need to understand. This program wasn't built to make you feel brave, because courage means acting despite fear. And that's exhausting as a long-term strategy. This program was built to teach your nervous system, slowly through repeated experiences, that other people are not a threat. That being seen is not dangerous, that making a mistake in front of someone doesn't destroy anything that truly matters. This is reconditioning, and reconditioning takes time and consistency. That's why this is a 30-day program divided into 4 weeks, each with a different, gradually increasing focus. Don't skip weeks. The nervous system learns through accumulated repetition, not through leaps. Week 1. Observe without judging. The goal this week is not to change anything. It's to learn how to observe. For 7 days, you become a researcher of yourself, not a critic, a researcher. Researchers collect data without judgment. They record what they see without deciding whether it's good or bad. Daily practice. The activation log. Every night before bed, write down 3 things. First, what social moment today most activated your monitoring system? Any moment when you felt that familiar tightening, the acceleration, the calculation of impression starting. Second, what happened in your body? Where did you feel it? How would you describe the physical sensation? Tight chest, cold hands, knotted stomach? Be specific. This data will show you how sensations shift over time. Third, what automatic thought appeared? Not what you wish you had thought. What actually showed up? No censorship. Just record it. The act of observing a pattern without merging with it creates a small but crucial distance between you and the fear. You begin to be someone who has this pattern instead of someone who is this pattern. That distinction is the foundation for everything that follows. Extra exercise. The neutral mirror. Once a day, spend 2 minutes looking at yourself in a mirror with one intention. Do not evaluate. Just look the way you would look at a landscape. When judgment appears, simply note, judgment is here. Don't fight it. Return to a neutral gaze. Week 2. Reduce safety behaviors. Safety behaviors are the shields we use to manage social anxiety in the short term, but that reinforce fear in the long term. Headphones on the train so you're unavailable. Holding a drink at a party so you look occupied. Checking your phone when silence feels uncomfortable. Agreeing with things you don't agree with to avoid conflict. Each shield tells your nervous system, you were right. It was dangerous. And the fear of not using the shield grows stronger. Practice, remove one shield. Per day, make a list of your most common safety behaviors. Each day this week, choose one, and deliberately don't use it in at least one situation. Just one, not everywhere. Discomfort will appear. That's the point. You need to let discomfort exist long enough for your nervous system to register. Nothing catastrophic happened. That window of nothing catastrophic is the data that recalibrates risk. Extra exercise, the intentionally simple question. Once this week, ask a question you would normally avoid for fear of sounding obvious. Observe what happens. Most of the time, the response will simply be a normal answer. That lived experience updates the evidence bank your system uses to calculate risk. Week 3, intentional presence. Fear of judgment lives in the future and the past. In the future, it builds rejection scenarios. In the past, it replays evidence of not being enough. When you are genuinely present, focused on what's happening now, the monitoring system has nowhere to latch onto. Practice. External focus. In every social interaction this week, intentionally redirect attention from inside to outside. When you notice yourself monitoring what the other person thinks of you, shift focus to them. What are they saying? How do they seem to feel? What are they trying to communicate through tone, expression, posture? The monitoring system is self-focused by design. When you turn the camera outward, there's less space to monitor your own performance. And something else happens. When you stop managing impressions, you naturally become more present, more interesting, more real. Extra exercise. The no agenda conversation. Once this week, have a conversation with no objective. You're not trying to sound smart. You're not trying to create an impression. You're simply talking. Start with someone safe if you need lower risk. Then try again with someone who usually triggers more discomfort. Week 4. Integration and identity. The first 3 weeks were about changing what you do. The 4th week is about changing who you are. When behavior changes but identity doesn't, the new behavior depends on willpower, which is limited. Eventually, old patterns return because the identity is still the same. But when identity shifts, new behaviors become natural. They simply become who you are. Practice. The letter to yourself. On the first day of week 4, write a letter to the version of you who has completed this process, the version who now has evidence that being around others is not dangerous. How does this version enter a room? How do they respond when they make a mistake? How do they exist around people without managing impressions, just being? Write in detail, with generosity. This isn't fantasy, it's a map. Extra exercise, voluntary exposure. This week, intentionally enter a situation you would normally avoid, the event you've been postponing, a new group, starting a conversation with someone you wouldn't usually approach. The goal isn't perfection, the goal is reality. You go without a fully rehearsed script, you allow imperfection, and you survive. So your nervous system records, again, that the threat was never real. What you can expect by week 4 is not the absence of fear. It's a different relationship to it. The ability to notice fear without being ruled by it. An internal evidence base built over 4 weeks, showing that you can exist around other people with more freedom than you once believed possible. And that is the real beginning, not the end, the beginning. Let me give you a concrete example of what this process looks like in real life. A small example. 3 lines on paper that become something much bigger when actually lived. Juliana is 26 years old and works as an administrative assistant. She started the program on a Monday. In week 1, on the 3rd day, she wrote in her journal, "Team meeting today. I wanted to suggest a change in the filing process that I think would be more efficient." I didn't speak. I felt my stomach tighten when the boss asked if anyone had suggestions. I kept looking at my notebook. The thought was, what if my suggestion sounds too obvious, like I don't understand the current process? That was week 1, just observation. She didn't try to change anything. She simply recorded. In week 2, during the practice of removing safety behaviors, she identified that looking down at her notebook during meetings was one of her most consistent shields. In a smaller meeting with only 3 people, she practiced maintaining eye contact while others spoke instead of lowering her gaze. It was uncomfortable, but nothing catastrophic happened. In week 3, during a conversation with a co-worker in the hallway, she asked a genuine question about how the colleague had solved a specific spreadsheet problem. A question she would normally avoid because it might reveal a technical limitation. The colleague responded generously, explained everything, and it turned into a 15-minute conversation that Juliana later described as the most real conversation I've had at work in months. In week 4, at another team meeting, when the boss asked if anyone had suggestions about the filing process, she felt her stomach tighten, just like 3 weeks earlier. But this time, she spoke. Her voice came out a little quieter than she wanted. The suggestion wasn't met with immediate enthusiasm. The boss simply said, "Interesting, let me think about it," which is a neutral response, not a positive one. And Juliana sat with that for a moment. But this time, the nighttime replay lasted 15 minutes, not 3 hours. And at the end of those 15 minutes, she wrote in her journal, "I spoke. I don't know if anything will come of it, but I said what I thought, in my own voice, in front of 6 people, and I'm still here, whole. 3 lines on paper, weeks of accumulated practice, and 1 sentence that changes everything. I'm still here, whole." That's what this process produces. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of you, even with the fear. So let's recap what you understood today. The fear of judgment is not weakness. It's a protection system that was built by a younger version of you in response to real experiences of rejection or humiliation, using the resources that version of you had at the time. It made sense when it was created. The problem is that it was never updated, and it's still running the same code in completely different contexts, charging a very high price in your adult life. The shadow has a name, and when something has a name, it loses power. What you've been carrying now has a name. It has a story, it has logic, and because it has logic, it can be worked with. The 30-day program is not a promise of total healing in a month. It's a foundation. 4 weeks of gradual reconditioning, accumulated evidence, and lived experiences that teach the body what the rational mind already knows. That the presence of others is not an existential threat. That you can make mistakes and survive. That you can be seen, imperfect and real, and still be accepted. That the unedited version of you is not only enough, but is the only version capable of creating real connection. And real connection is what's on the other side of this work. Not a life without social discomfort, but a life where discomfort no longer determines what you do or don't do. A life where you show up as you are and discover there was space for you all along. If this video found its way to you somehow, if any of today's stories felt familiar in a way that tightened your chest, leave a comment below.